Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, Obie Fernandez, who is a software engineer, speaker, DJ, author, and is currently chief scientist at Olympia. Obie joins us from Mexico City, Mexico. Obie Fernandez, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thanks, Robbie. Glad to be here.
So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Oh man, we're just getting right into it. I mean, definitely having some test coverage, because if you have test coverage, you can make changes. But how boring must that answer be? I'm guessing every guest says that.
Some variation of that, but...
One of the reasons after nearly 2 decades that I still love Ruby and still insist on using it, even these days where almost everything that I'm personally involved in is done in Python, it seems like. I think Ruby syntax leads itself, especially for someone who's been doing it for so long since me, like me, is to write readable code. And I think that's a very important factor in your software being maintainable is, can I go back to what Obie from 6 months ago or Obie from a year and a half ago wrote and figure it out? And I think my track record's pretty good on that. And I think Ruby is to blame for some of that in terms of writing code that is fluent and, reads like natural language. And yeah, I mean, that's my answer.
I think about also, you mentioned test coverage, and precursor to this conversation, you had also mentioned that code that's like robust code. And I was kind of curious, maybe hear your thought on like what makes code robust? Like how would you kind of delineate that?
Well, I think if you've been doing this long enough, we're all familiar with like the code that blows up for no explicable reason. I've gotten a lot of that in the last year. The app that I'm currently working on is called Olympia, and it probably is the most postmodern software I've ever written. I've hit a new peak of like external dependencies with all the different APIs and kind of offloading major subsystems to providers and things. And even the main one, which is OpenAI, which I use for GPT-4 for the main conversation loop of Olympia. It's the engine behind how our virtual assistants communicate with our users. And over the last 6 months, I think I've done a pretty good job of making the conversation loop robust in the sense that pretty much anything that OpenAI throws at me in terms of error messages, I can handle gracefully, whether it's retrying or giving feedback to the user about what's going on or alerting customer support so that they can be on top of it. But it's taken a while to get there. There's definitely been an investment, and the less mature that the services that you're integrating with, the more uncertainty you tend to have in terms of what's going on. Like I can think off the top of my head of like probably at least 6 or 7 different ways that a request to OpenAI can fail, at the moment.
That's interesting. I was thinking about, definitely we'll get into talking about your book and stuff like that, and definitely talk a little bit about the software project that you're primarily focused on right now, Olympia. But when you're integrating with external dependencies, APIs on any software project can be a little challenging. But I don't know that because I personally haven't done much integration at all with any of the AI platforms. Part of my hesitation there are just like, one is trying to find good, useful use cases for particular projects we're already working on. And it hasn't just been necessarily a big requirement for most of our current client base. But when I try to wrap my head around, like, how do you validate if it's a good response or not from something it's not like a data point that you can easily just check, like this thing is 100% accurate data point. And this, how do you think about that when you're having a conversational based back and forth with an API and stuff like that? And gives you something that's relatively confident in itself, but is this actually match that you're saying? Pulling back weird areas, but it's like.
Oh man, I wasn't even talking about like the qualitative, kind of more subjective, correctness of the response. I was talking about whether the response even worked to begin with. I've had to familiarize myself with a whole gamut of HTTP error codes that I was, kind of had forgotten for a while, like 426, 427, different kinds of 500s. Because we get them all. I mean, there's, I'm picking on OpenAI, but it's just because, they have a fair amount of instability in their API. I think sometimes they just have too much load instability, which is not reflected on their status page. So, I mean, you can't even just necessarily rely on that to know whether something's going on. Luckily, for the most part, if you have a smart retry strategy, you just end up waiting you do a little bit of back off and it's usually okay. The other thing that's nice is that at least for now, the users have a super high tolerance of errors because ChatGPT is just isn't reliable itself and, will fail. It's really an interesting topic. It's a different topic, but it's an interesting topic in terms of eval. Evals is what you call, kind of systems or patterns that are meant to check the correctness of the response, whether it aligns with what your, particular guidelines are. So there's different kinds of evals that you can do. And actually, this is something I get to in the book, in the final chapter called quality control. So there's kind of two faces of the same coin. There's evals and guardrails. And guardrails are what you implement to eval on the fly the responses you're getting back from the AI. So, for instance, a really simple guardrail that we have is to make sure that only official languages are the AI only responds in official languages, and we do that with a super super cheap model that's really really fast. Essentially, we want to spot check and make sure that no one's like kind of hacked our system to talk in Vietnamese or Chinese or something that blows up our costs by like 10x because of the nature of it.
Hey folks, it's me, Robbie. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus they're certified ISO 27001 and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. So you could potentially, it could be very easy for someone, if they just loosely integrate with something like OpenAI to kind of change how they're using it, whether it's malicious or not, or they're just changing the language, and that adds a whole other level of complexity to the infrastructure.
For this kind of app, since it's a conversational app and you're letting the user interface directly with the AI, our users are great. They pay quite a bit to use the service. So we haven't really had too many like out and out flagrant abusive cases or, things where people were wasting resources or using us inappropriately. A lot of the things that we implement that are kind of like extra layered on top, whether it's guardrails or eval kind of, after the fact based evaluation of the conversations for quality control, for customer satisfaction reasons, things like that. They're just that. I mean, they're meant to provide a better service, right? But AI changes the game because it's no longer just about the quality of your code, that makes things maintainable. I mean, some of the ways that you can use AI, and this is probably what's most unique about my book and what I'm most excited about and what readers seem to be most excited about as well, is that I advocate for dropping in little AI black boxes as discrete AI components to replace otherwise traditional implementations of functionality. So for instance, I've been playing around with this concept within Olympia for some of our account management. So in Olympia, you subscribe to one of three base plans that gives you a team of AI powered consultants. And starting about 4 or 5 months ago, we started adding the ability to add extra assistance to your plan. If you're listening and you're an experienced software developer, you can imagine, okay, there's like kind of a catalog of extra bots you can add to your account. So you look at those and you have a button that lets you add them. And then there's some validation that goes on. And then I have to create a new line item and add it to their Stripe subscription. And I have to modify them as, it's kind of like the typical things you would expect when an account change request. So when I was implementing that, instead of doing it in what I would call just a normal traditional kind of way, what I did was I modeled an account manager class, almost like a microservice, the way you think about a microservice, that's responsible for that kind of account change. And I made like a little worker. In the book, I call this approach multitude of workers. So I made a worker who's my account manager, and the interface between the rest of the app and this account manager is English. It's plain text. So basically, if the user goes in and looks at an extra assistant they want to add to their account and they push that button to do so, internally there's an English statement that's generated. Please add bot config with a UUID to account with a UUID. That's packaged inside of an account change request, and it's sent to this worker. And then the worker looks at the request, and it has at its disposal a number of tool functions that allow it to do a number of things, including adding new bot configs to an account. But it can also send an email to the user or to customer service or both. It can also reference Olympia documentation and guidelines, and it can also finalize the request. So then at that point, programming it and maintaining that business logic, let's say, around how that account manager works becomes a matter of prompting. So that the prompt that's given to account manager tells it how to behave. And in fact, while we're talking, I'll fire up my editor and I'll bring it up so I can actually read it. But the instructions literally tell it what to do when it gets a request. I'll read you the system directive, quote unquote. This is the configuration for this bot, right? You are an account manager for Olympia. The user will request changes to their account, and you will process those changes by invoking one or more of the functions provided. Make sure to notify the account owner of the result of the change request. Always end by calling the finished function so that we save the state of the change request as completed. That's it. Between that and the functions that it gets, and the functions it has is add bot config to account, add new line item to subscription, notify account owner, and completed. Those are the functions that it has available to it. Those are just those are just normal methods that have some imperative logic associated with it. Add a bot config to an account, basically starts a transaction, finds the right bot, finds the right account, adds it to it. And then the output of those functions give a little bit more instructions as well. So for instance, if you add a bot config to the account, the output of that function, as opposed to being, I don't know what you would typically return from a function like that, but the output of this particular function is bot config with name, fill in the blank, added to user's account. Make sure to use the bot's name when communicating with the user. And then it says new client for bot config name, account name signed up. I'm kind of going through this a little quickly. Make sure to add a line item to the user's subscription. The price is fill in the blank. The monthly charge in cents is fill in the blank, right? So that's what's returned to the bot when it calls that function. The reason I call it multitude of workers is because it changes your perspective on how you're implementing logic in your system to being more like you have a little human that is following instructions and you plop them into your code base.
And then in kind of thinking through that, do you feel like that approach is just helping you kind of think about how you could potentially tap external workers or things like that versus how you're doing it within your own internal app? Because you could be like, click a button and it upgrades, and you go through the normal process, but for you to change your mental model of how it's its own bot in a way that you're interacting with, and so then it's taking advantage of that in that sort of way. Then is it safe to assume that when the emails might come from the account manager or for whoever the emails get sent, they might be a little bit more tailored toward the particular, they might not always be the same because it's not going to be using the same email. Your account's been upgraded very consistently, everybody gets the same email, or it might have a little bit more personalization and flavor and feel like you're interacting with an application, but you're actually interacting with an organization, like with a team of people that you're working with in some capacity. Like there's like a air quoting account manager over there that's helping take care of me, make me feel like a little bit more of a white glove service.
I could have it do that, right? And it would probably be as easy as just saying, insert a little bit of friendliness into it. I didn't in this case. But what you do get for free is that if something goes wrong or something is different than what is expected, it is more robust in the sense that it can deal with it, or it can escalate to a human in the loop to fix it. But kind of going back to something you said a minute or two ago, it does allow me to do some pretty cool things that I wouldn't be able to do as easily with traditional code. And I'll give you a concrete example. We rolled this out, and very soon thereafter, I got a Slack message from our customer service team saying, "Hey, we had a failure with this new code. A user with an account that was inactive because they had scheduled it for cancellation added a bot, and we don't think that that should be allowed. Like, you should have an active account." And I said, "I think you're right. Like, you shouldn't be able to add an account. It causes operational issues, right?" So JP said, "Do you want me to add a story for that?" And I said, "No, I think I got it." Because I literally just opened up this file I have in front of my face right now, and I added a line to the directive that I didn't read the first time through. Okay. So after it said, "Make sure to notify the account owner of the result of the change request," I inserted one line that said, "Do not allow the user to add a new bot config unless their account is active." As part of what is provided to this bot, they get a dump of the account. So this bot knows whether the account is active. So with the addition of that one statement into the directive, I was able to handle the change request, which was don't let people with inactive accounts add bots, right? Not only that, and I tested this to make sure, if you do try to add a bot and you have an inactive account, the bot will write to you and say, "Hey, I know you requested this to happen, but your account is inactive. If you'd like to try again after making your account active, please do so."
It's kind of blowing my mind a little bit, and in a good way. Trying to, thinking about this, I'm curious. Take a quick step back because you've mentioned your book a few times, and I'll mention it in the intro section there. But could you share like a little bit about what inspired you to write your upcoming book, Patterns of Application Development Using AI?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I like over a year ago when I started working at Olympia, because I've written books before and this is such a greenfield, with AI and stuff, I started taking notes of things that I thought were novel or, cool in different ways. For any of you out there who dream of writing a book, that's one of the main things you should do, like use Evernote or whatever, and just keep track of things. I think Ken Beck or maybe it was Martin Fowler used to use like actual index cards and told us about that. So, eventually what you do is when you have a stack of those index cards, whether they're physical or virtual, then you have a book because you have content to write about. It's very hard to sit down and just like materialize a book out of nowhere, right? So I've been doing that for a while. And then in Vegas, my old friend Tom Rossi raised his hand during a talk I was giving about AI, which you may have been in the room. He said something like, "Oh, this all seems really cool what you're talking about, but I'm finding this AI overwhelming. Like, how do I get started? How would you recommend I get started?" And that's a really good question. And I was like, oh, I had a voice in the back of my head going, "There's got to be like a million people asking this same exact question right now." AI is this big, big thing that's kind of like encroaching on all of our lives, whether we want it to or not. And so, what do you do with it? Like, how do you get started? If you do as much as just subscribe to one or two AI newsletters, it's already overwhelming because literally every day you get an avalanche of new things going on and whatnot. So I said, okay, cool. Let's write a book that describes how to get started. So I took inspiration from classic Greenfield books like the Gang of Four Patterns book, Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture by Martin Fowler, Patterns of Enterprise Integration, by Gregor Hopi and David Rice, old colleagues at ThoughtWorks from when I worked there in the 2000s. And I said, I want to write a book like that is literally, has a shot at becoming like the reference book for how people talk about integrating AI components into their application development. And I took a very, very specific approach, which was to ignore things that I feel are transient. So, like the whole debate about what AI's appropriate role is, whether it will replace engineers, specific technologies that are currently in vogue or whatnot. Like I tried to stay away from those topics and not cover those. And I tried to take real code from Olympia and show how they represent patterns of interaction between an AI and a normal code base. And very much putting the emphasis on normal day-to-day application development that everyone does. So the examples are in Ruby on Rails because that's what I know. I extracted the code examples in the book from Olympia. They're meant to be very practical. There's no like car and wheels like you might see in like an OO primer or, stuff like that. It's all kind of real examples, of things. And then in terms of what the book covers, part one starts from the beginning, like kind of if going through a primer of what is a large language model, how does it work, what are the components of it, what is the latent space? I mean, I talk about narrowing the path for when you're trying to generate something with an AI, and why do I call it that? Like because these frontier models, which is the terminology they use to refer to GPT-4 and Claude 3, like the really, really big ones. For intents and purposes, they know everything that there is to know at least a low level. And because of that, take any three-letter acronym that you throw at it, just to give you an example, and there's probably 20 different versions of it that you could be talking about. So they get confused, like if you don't narrow the scope of what you're asking for and what you're talking about. And that's an art, at this point. There's a lot of craft in using these things, but you can learn it, and that's what people refer to as prompt engineering. So there's a lot of material that's just kind of fundamental material about prompt engineering in there, and how do you come up with a prompt? How do you refine prompts? How do you manage them? How do you version them? How do you template them? Things like that. So there's a lot of that kind of fundamental stuff. If you're going to use AI to drive intelligent workflows, how do you think about that? From an architectural perspective, how do you model it in your mind? How do you model it in terms of how you will implement it? If you're going to use AI to do really cool things like self-healing data or intelligent error handling, when we talk about robustness, I mean, you can use AI to do pretty cool things for your application in terms of robustness. So the example I give of the book in terms of self-healing data, I mean, we deal with a lot of JSON because we had the AI models generate JSON. And because they are not perfect at generating anything, really, they make mistakes. Just like if you were a human writing JSON, you would make mistakes, right? You would forget quotes, you would mess up your quotation or things like that, or you would deviate from schemas. And they do the same thing. So you go through enough of these errors and you have it blow up your code enough and you start thinking, maybe I can just get it to fix the JSON that was broken. Just give it another crack, right? So you can do stuff like that. It's not so much a retry, but like if you have like if you have broken JSON and you want to try to get some value out of it, like we have a JSON fixer class. So you give it the JSON and you give it the error message and you say, hey, here, fix this while preserving what it's supposed to do or what it meant.
We'll be back with our interview with Obie in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robbie. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for listening to Maintainable. If you're finding these discussions valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify to help spread the word. Also, do you think there's someone I should have on the podcast sometime? Shoot me an email to Robbie with a Y at maintainable.fm and state your case. And now, let's get back to our interview with Obie Fernandez. I think about, like when you're building out applications and taking advantage of using these types of, these LLMs and their API endpoints that they're offering us. I'm also curious if you've thought much about how just maintenance and work of the projects that you're working on, how AI can be a benefit to just, you mentioned self-healing as a thing, but also just from like coming to existing legacy code. I know that you primarily maybe these days work a lot more greenfield applications, but you think about projects that are around for a while and like, how are you thinking about how AI may or may not be able to aid in the development process and help maybe expedite some of those, the challenges that some teams face from accruing a lot of technical debt or just being really outdated on versions and stuff like that and dealing with upgrades and removing some of that fear, knowing that AI is not perfect, but neither are humans.
I can't really speak to that. I don't have direct experience with it. To the extent that I've used, I tried using a new product from GitHub called, I think called Code Workspaces or something like that. They have a beta. There's a waiting list. I finally got access to it, and I don't know if it's just bad with Ruby. It's entirely possible. But the way that this thing works is it supposedly has access to your whole code that when you add a repo to it, and then you start a new session, I believe is what it's called, and then you add you say what you're working on. So it's like changing a feature, fixing a bug, or whatever, and then it goes through and it creates a plan of action and it runs it by you. And if you agree with the plan of action, I mean, you could modify it if you want, but once it's good, you hit go, and then it uses AI to kind of do the work for you. So I tried to do that with Olympia and to have it. I you're working with these frontier technologies. You end up, things change out from under you. So, like for instance, in Olympia, when I started out, I built it on MagnaChat, which is an open source ChatGPT clone that I wrote and like back in February of last year. And so some things we're still using kind of the MagnaChat backend to do requests to the AI. And nowadays, most of my stuff is switched over to Ray, which is my library for doing AI that I talk about in the book. So I took one particular class that was still using Magma, and I said I want to switch this over to use this module, Chat Completion, which is from Ray. And I was pretty excited about it, and I hit go, and then it thought about it, and it's even animated, so it showed me that it was doing stuff, and then it just deleted like 80% of the class and said it was done. And what it left me with was nonsensical, it just didn't work. So I think it's quite not quite there yet. At least not for Ruby, or at least not for big apps, which Olympia at this point is. So
But, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm always kind of curious about it on that front, thinking about will there be able to expedite some of those painful things that some teams are dealing with, and I think it might still be a little bit out there for us. But I'm also curious a little bit more about. Can you tell us a little bit about Olympia as well? You kind of hinted at it a little bit, but like, what's the core idea behind the product?
the core idea behind the product is to provide as close as we can get with the current technology to a human teammate for your small business. So we have like 12, or I think we have 14 now, different kinds of profiles. So it's like things like legal consultant, business strategist, social media expert, content specialist, copywriter. And some of them have special tools like for instance, a copywriter understands how to collaboratively create a content brief with you. Let's say you want to write a blog post or something. So it will go over and you define the requirements, and then it has tools for writing long form content in one shot. So it can generate like thousands of words, kind of complicated outlines from a brief compared to what you get out of ChatGPT, which, you can tell ChatGPT, I want to write a blog post, and it'll, spit out a certain amount, but then it stops. The copywriter has tools to do, kind of big things. Some of them have extra knowledge and are trained. We're very gradually ramping up content ingestion for some of our experts so that they get, like, basically we can subscribe them to newsletters, and then the content of the newsletter gets digested and then put into their knowledge base so that they have like kind of special knowledge. We also have human-augmented AI. Most of our assistants are just pure AI constructed characters, but a subset of our assistants actually have a human. They're clones of a human that is a particular expert in, something. So, like for instance, Chandel Stone, who is well known here in Mexico City because she runs a startup accelerator, is kind of like our resident startup advisor. So her bot is trained on a bunch of her, material, her talks and blog posts, and she's sunk a substantial amount of time into training the bot as well, having conversations with it to get it to respond the way that she would. What makes this different than just like a custom GPT is that it is very, very much supposed to be like a little mini me version of the human that acts as an assistant. So it has the ability to escalate to its human, and its human is expected to review everything that it does. So Olympia features an interface for being able to, Shandell can go in there, monitor the conversations, and steer the conversations in certain directions. Custom GPTs are meant for scale. They're kind of like an app store, mobile app kind of economic model. This is more of a AI assistant for consultants and people who deal one-on-one as experts.
That's interesting. So when they're going through that, when your customers are using these like using Chantel's tool or assistant clone or mini me, whatever, however you want to describe that, is most of those requests happening in real time with your customers, and then occasionally it escalates something to her to get some feedback on, or does the AI assistant know how to say, here's some of the different types of things that I've been helping different customers with, review my work, like, and then is it just waiting for you to kind of interact with a prompt and then expand on its knowledge base there?
I mean, this is all, I want to be humble and say this is all in its infancy. So you see occasional glimpses of amazing magic that should be coming when the models get a little more powerful. But yes, it happens in real time. For the most part, they're dealing with the AI. The AI is impersonating, in this case, Chandel. And Chandel can speak to the AI the way that you would speak to your junior assistant and say, hey, what's going on with such and such client, and get a report. And the AI understands that it's talking to its clone boss.
That's fascinating. I'm curious also, like, did many of these assistants that you can interact with, do they have a lot of access to performing actions on behalf of your customers, or like integrating with other APIs and stuff like that? Or is that something that's kind of on the roadmap? Like generate the marketing content idea or the blog post, but also generate the images and assets. And actually, can you just take care of the publishing it and scheduling the things across social media and everything? And
So we're in the process of rolling out image generation this week. So that's already implemented with Stable Diffusion. It's like the newest new thing that we're rolling out. And then we're working on the ability to let your bots kind of do anything that you can do on the web. So there's different approaches to this problem. Right? You can do one by one implementations, on a per API basis, but it's time consuming and it's difficult, and you can only do one at a time. There's another approach, which is the one that we're working on, which uses some pretty cool technology to basically give your bot a browser, a web browser of their own, and then it can log in with your help if necessary to Twitter, to whatever, your CRM, and then do stuff on your behalf, and that session stays stored so that it can use it in the future. And I think this is the direction that the industry is going to go. Actually, OpenAI just acquired a company that probably has like literally yesterday, I saw the news. I forget what they're called. I think it's Rock AI, Rock Eye, something like that. That probably has some of the leading edge technology for giving the bot the ability to understand a browser screen, like kind of buttons and things like that. But I think that's where we're going. We're gonna want, as humans, we're gonna want our AI agents to pretty much do anything that we can do for us.
hey folks, it's me, Robbie. Just want to take a quick moment to plug my own company, Planet Argon. We're a Ruby on Rails software consultancy, primarily. We work with some other technologies as well, but if you've got an existing and aging legacy Ruby on Rails application, or maybe Laravel, or maybe React, we do that too, and need some help, get in touch with us at planetargon.com. We help organizations with existing applications make them better and more maintainable. That's right, planetargon.com. And now, back to our show. Yeah, I think about that in terms of like where we've used it ourselves, or when I talk with some of our customers that are using it for different things. But there's always this kind of point of being like, well, do we then take the next step and like integrate things with like Zapier and their huge data set of, or at least a collection of APIs that you can potentially integrate with, and like then you can kind of figure out a way to maybe navigate it that way. But the browser-based thing is also, that's an interesting angle as well. And then just wondering like, how do you?
Like I looked into Zapier, and I have kind of half written code that integrates with Zapier. But when this is really going to take off like crazy, well, first of all, I think we need like one or more evolutionary steps. Like, I don't know if it's GPT-4.5 or GPT-5 or whatever the equivalent class is there, because the models are not quite good enough. And like anyone who's working on this, I hear the same thing from other people as well. It's like they're not quite intelligent enough. Hopefully they get there. But this is all still really nerdy. Like even the agent stuff, like we keep a close eye on certain competitors that are offering agent behavior, because we're going in that direction as well with Olympia. And a lot of the stuff that's being called agent behavior is not exactly like the kind of science fiction-y agent thing that we're kind of all hoping for or dreading, depending on perspective. It's really more like, okay, I configured a bot to do a particular job, and now it's doing it by itself. And I think if any, that's just a script. Like if you can call it a bot. I think what makes it legitimately some degree of an agent is that they do have some amount of robustness around being able to retry things or understand different boundary conditions, or if something changes out from under them, they don't break because they're looking at the source material semantically rather than structurally. So that's important. That makes it an agent. But they have to be programmed. And one thing that we've learned over and over again, and I'm sure you've been around long enough to understand as well, is that even the most no code solutions still end up being used by quasi programmers, not really normal people, right? Like it's still people who have some strong motivation or interest in doing what amounts to programming, even if they're dragging boxes around on a screen with arrows. They're still programming, and the vast majority of people in this world don't want to program. They just have no interest in it. Their eyes start blurring or watering, whenever you give them anything that looks like programming. So therefore, actually, along those lines, I saw an interesting data point the other day, which was like some ridiculously high percentage of people who use spreadsheets have never, ever, even once used any sort of equals, formula or anything for it. It's literally just a grid to, to put things in a grid format. It's just a way to lay out data, right? Because most normal people don't want to program. So where I see this really, really taking off, and we're not there yet, is when you can describe probably by voice, like, hey, I'd like you to do this thing. Can you do it? And it's probably going to say, I don't know, but I can try. And then there's an iterative process, where it tries and you say, no, do this instead. And then eventually it has a skill, a new skill. And then that's persisted in some way. And you can say, can you do that thing that you did for me again? Or can you do that every morning? Or etc.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think in terms of like how people are trying to wrap their head around this, and I've been loosely kind of I subscribe to newsletters and it's overwhelming, but just trying to get a sense of like how different teams are accounting for this or including it into their workflow and process, but also knowing that you can't just automate it away yet. We're like not there. It could be a ways off, but more to come on that. Well, cool. With that, I do have a couple of quick last questions for you, Obie. Is there a non-software, non-technical book that you do like to recommend to peers?
So I read a lot of science fiction for fun. I don't know. I'm particular to Ian Banks, so like pretty much anything that he's written, I think gives us kind of an interesting, different perspective for a future.
Excellent. I'll include links to a couple of Ian's books in the show notes for people. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering and AI online?
Definitely Twitter these days. Yeah. Also, I mean, lately, and this is kind of why I ended up getting into this to begin with. I mean, I do still blog on my Medium blog, which is ob.medium.com. And I've had a couple of blog posts go viral. I mean, the original one that kind of set me off on this journey was the one I wrote about playing Dungeons and Dragons with my kids in GPT-4, and that got almost 1 million page views, and which was insane. Like I was like, okay, well, it reminded me of like the old times where you could blog something and get traction, and got me excited about working on AI stuff. And then recently I wrote about why Rubyists should be excited about AI and why we have a shot at like creating really cool things. Because culturally, if I had to put it in a nutshell, I'd say as Rubyists and as, and Ruby on Rails people, we love magic. Like the whole convention over configuration kind of ethos. Everything we get around Ruby and Ruby, I find to be very humanistic. Culturally, like I think that gives us superpowers when it comes to like actually using this AI technology, which is humanistic. So I've been evangelizing that. A lot of it is admittedly hand wavy and has, could be picked apart, but it's aspirational, and I wrote about it on my blog. If people want to go find it. Yeah, I mean, I that got a lot of traction as well. That got a huge number of reads and it's gotten passed around a lot. So I think there's something there. So yeah, I blog regularly on Twitter.
Excellent. I'll pull up those articles and include them in the show notes for people as well. And I appreciate you being help be a spokesperson for Ruby and AI because definitely interesting. And I think I agree a lot with that sentiment. And curious to see where this kind of goes, and like knowing that the communities can kind of help drive this stuff. And it's like, hey, like there's a perception that Python's primarily used in the science realm because they've got a bunch of math functionality and stuff. None of these things are predetermined necessarily. It's up to like the communities need to show that we can do this stuff in other technology stacks as well, and to show how simple we can make it and how readable it can be. And does that'll be interesting to see how that kind of pans out.
I think like you were there in the beginning as well, I remember. And what Rails did for a lot of us is give us the opportunity to start consulting companies, to become famous Ruby gem authors and maintainers, like to start significant projects that got significant traction, to write books the Rails way, things like that. So I see the same thing happening right now. So if you're either just getting started in your career and you want a way to stand out, or to make significant leaps and bounds in your career, I think there's no better time than I can think of recently. Because it's kind of one of those moments where all the rules are changing. I mean, that's what happened. That's essentially what happened in 2005 to 2007 when Rails came out. It was like all of a sudden the old rules were thrown out. There was all this interesting, cool stuff to be done. And I think that's happening now. And actually, because the world is different now, and for instance, a lot of this cool stuff is being done in Python and JavaScript, as Rubyists, we can look at some of the stuff that's getting traction, and I think we can do what they're doing actually better than them because we have more powerful tools, and because of our culture and because of our way of looking at it. And we're certainly not afraid to do things that don't scale. I mean, Rails still doesn't scale, right? I mean, according to the public. So I think a lot of the things that for instance, I'm advocating in the book are because of the way that they're driven by AI at the moment, since AI is expensive and slow, are subject to those kinds of criticisms. Like, why would you do this? This doesn't scale. But the way that the critic would say it doesn't scale is exactly the same way that they said it didn't scale. That Ruby on Rails didn't scale, or that Java didn't scale back in 1995 when I started in Java. Like I kind of seen the same story play out time and time again, which is why I'm not scared. It's not only that I'm not scared of it, I love it when I find something that's super cool that doesn't scale, quote unquote. Because the more that people say, hey, don't do that, that doesn't scale, the more it's like, okay, well, they're leaving it to us to have fun with and to innovate with.
Good food for thought there for us to kind of ruminate over. All right, with that, it's been such a delight having you stop by and talk shop with us, Obie.
Thank you, Robbie. I mean, it's a pleasure to see you as always.
Maintainable.